I'm a Cornell architecture student and an artist, and I recently went to the National Presidential Portrait Gallery. There were some winners, and there were some underwhelming contenders.
Where's the ugliest?
So, what makes a good painting? What makes a good portrait? Today, I'll be technically breaking down every presidential portrait and putting them into a tier list. Of course, Georgie Boy. And it's pretty good. I mean, you can see that the main light sections is the hand and the face, and what that creates is this nice triangular composition. Although when you usually do a triangular composition, it creates a feeling of power and stability. But if you have this bottom angle and it's at a slant like this, it's going to create a little more dynamic of a pose. So you have this kind of dynamic triangle, which makes him feel like a leader, but it also makes him feel a little bit more chaotic than that, not as like structural and, fist down as maybe a monarchy would. So I think it actually exemplifies kind of that point in history in a weird abstract way. Now, the things that I don't like about it is that there's excessive detail right here and here, and I don't know if that necessarily really supplements the subject, which is, of course, George. And, it kind of detracts from the overall thing. So I'd say that it's pretty good. We're going to put in B tier because everything is anatomically correct, but, the background and detail, you really push it down, in my opinion. John Adams. And for John Adams, it's all right. I mean, the face is really good. I would say it's actually better than the last one we just looked at, George Washington. But I would say that the background choice of just black is pretty lazy. I don't really like when people just do black or white or whatever. So it looks lazy, I would say. And it's more interesting when there's at least some sort of light going on, maybe some abstract pattern in the background. It just creates just a dull feeling, so it's a little bit dull. Now, that being said, the actual portrait of the face is really good. Doesn't quite make up for the laziness of the background. But I would say that as light transitions from the light section of the face over to the dark section of the face, what happens is that you get a color transition away from yellow. And what that results in, and also because of the way that we biologically work with blood under the skin, is that things become a lot rosier. Now, you'll see in the next few portraits, some people look like they're dying or they're dead, and that's because they don't really understand this whole color thing. So they did a really good job on this one because it feels like there's blood under the surface, especially in the nose right here, and it's really well done. So I would say that the face really pulls this entire thing together, but, could be better. So I think I'm going to put this in C tier. Next one is Thomas Jefferson. Now, for Thomas Jefferson, portrait isn't that bad. There's also more interest in the background, like we were talking about earlier, which really makes it a lot better than the last one. But I would say that the problems here is that there's excessive detail in the hair. You really don't need that. I mean, Sargent obviously showed that to the world. When you look at hair that he created, it's all just these value masses. So you can really just simplify a lot of this. Just go like this, and then you can just soften the edge as a transition. See how it's just a bunch of value masses, and from a distance still looks the same. Now, obviously, you'd want to work it a little bit more than this because it doesn't exactly look super correct, but it would look better if there wasn't as excessive detail because it also pours more focus on the face here, right? So I would say that that's one thing holding it back. You don't really need all that detail, especially in the individual hairs and all that other stuff. That's a mistake, definitely on this one. And the background's not too interesting. It's okay, we'll put in the C tier. James Madison. And James Madison, not the best again. There's something that feels off about the whole face, and I think what it is, when you're working from life, what happens is the subject moves, and you'll see that if you draw like a little plumb line, and a plumb line is an old thing that artists would hold down from the ceiling to make sure that they had their verticals correct. If you pull a plumb line down here, you can see that it's not quite on the nose. So if you go down right here, it misses the nose, and then this hits the nose. And that's actually kind of what it would look like if you're straight on, or if you go off a little bit, you can see that it still hits the nose, but it's at more of an angle, right? But the problem here is that it's kind of, this left eye is drifting off in such a way that he's probably started off the portrait more front on, and then as he moved over, he started doing the nose details, and then you get this discontinuity in perspective. And what it creates is this kind of weird, like you feel like something's off, and there is something off. So that's a bit of a ding because it makes his facial structure look a bit strange. Now the other thing that I don't like about this one is that it looks like his hair was cut out of a cookie platter. Okay, so his edges here are completely out of whack. They don't look right. They look a little bit strange. Not really a fan of those, especially when you're dealing with hair. It's such a soft material, and the texture of it deserves to have a soft edge. And you'll see that later when we go to Sargent or or Zorn or some of the other like great artists who have done presidential portraits. But if we just soften this a little bit like that, and then also in the background, because there's going to be little stray hairs and stuff, and the edge is just going to be a lot softer, right? Let's just soften that entire thing. Now you don't blend everything. If you blend everything, it's going to look bad. But if you just do this little blending job here, see how that already feels a little bit more like hair? Now he looks a little bit like he has bedhead now. But do you see how it feels a little bit more realistic? Because that's actually the way that we perceive more. So this is a little bit inaccurate as far as how we would actually see the hair. So for all these, not amateur mistakes, but not, they're not a master, obviously. This artist has a few things wrong. For all of that, we're going to give it probably a D tier. D for definitely not Sargent. So this one, the artist was trying to do this kind of trick where the darks, like the black is supposed to be really light red, and you can do that to a certain extent because it kind of exists when you really warm shadows, but this is just overboard, and it feels a bit strange, almost like his, the right side of his face is in hell or something like that. So bit of an artistic choice, I suppose, but not the best for sure. I'm definitely not too much of a fan of it. I think if he had done that 1%, 2%, not like 50 million percent like he did here, it would end up looking a lot better, but it could be a lot better. As far as the actual drawing goes, it's actually pretty good. This is sort of what the face would look like. You can deconstruct it in a form like this, like Bridgman did. Yeah, everything seems to like actually go in perspective. So the overall drawing is pretty correct, but just that it's a strange artistic choice. I don't think it really does anything. The background's more interesting than that second one that we saw. That one was really boring. So the background's interesting. The drawing's good. The artistic choice is a bit strange, so we're going to put it in C tier. This isn't really a memorable portrait. It's just very generic, and it's a strange choice. 1825, John Quincy Adams. And it's not really the best. There's kind of some problems here, especially anatomical issues, where it looks like he's a bit of, like he has dwarfism or something like that. And you can see that if we draw over it, the leg doesn't feel attached to the hip, and I think there's just a proportion issue here where it feels like his body's just kind of like melting into the chair, and he doesn't actually have a pelvis that rotates or takes up any mass. So that's very strange. I'm not really a fan of that. And the other thing is, I don't really get the context of this painting. The context here makes no sense. I mean, I don't know why George Washington's over here. The narrative doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's excessive detail right here where you could sargent it up, and I'll show you like Madam X, for example, what he would do. And he just dry brush some suggested details, and then it gives more power to the subject. But right now, if you look at it and you back up, your eye kind of waltzes around and in no particular direction, and there's no real like emphasis on the face. So you go down here and you're looking at this detail, and then you're kind of at the hand, and then you're wondering why he has this book. And then you go over here, and it's a bit strange. And then also, if we make a composition of this, like this, then you see that the light is over here, it's over here, and it's over here. And it's kind of fighting between these two areas. So you're looking at the face, and it's fighting between these two areas. And what this does is that you look at the face, and then the left side of the painting looks super interesting. So you go, oh, well, what's over here? And then at this point, since it's crammed in the corner, it feels like a bit of a strange compositional choice. And it actually pushes you out of the painting onto the next painting on the wall in the museum or whatever. So it's not really captivating, doesn't keep you within the composition, it pushes you out. So it's a bit strange. The only thing that I do say is pretty good, and the artist clearly understood this, is that the background edges in the background need to be soft. So you can see that there's not really a hard line anywhere. And if we really harshened up this line, unblended, so to say, but it's really the way that you apply the paint, it's not blending it afterwards, creates this kind of, your attention is drawn over here. And if everything in the background was painted with no softness, then it would feel like the foreground, and it would feel more important. So he did do that well. He understood his background. So this artist did okay, but there's just anatomy problems. It feels a bit strange. It's not very memorable. The background's a bit awkward, and it just feels very generic and bad. So I'm not really a fan of this one. We're gonna have to put this as the first E tier one. Too many problems. Too many problems. Andrew Jackson. So, Andrew Jackson, besides his, history that everybody complains about, the painting's not very great either. So, you can see that in the fabric, it's kind of over blended. And I know I've been talking about blending as, softening an edge is important, but it might look soft within the fabric. That might actually be correct edge. But it looks over blended by contrast because the edge between the actual fabric and his shirt or whatever he's wearing here feels very hard. So again, it looks like if you ever have something in your painting and it looks like it was cut out of a cookie cutter and it's not supposed to look like that, then there's a problem. There's an edge problem. You're making your edges too sharp. So if you just went in here and again softened up some of these edges, which fabric would look like because it's a texture. Fabric has a very soft texture, especially around like the edge. So you can even see like on me, obviously it's auto blurred, but the edge of the fabric is going to be a little bit softer. So you just soften up all of that, soften. And it's already starting to look just a little bit more natural. Now, the other thing is the hair also is way too hard. So that's wrong. So you'd go in here, you'd soften up a bit of this. This is already decently soft, but it could be more soft. And this is a big problem with oil paint, is that everything goes down harsh and you need to really know what you're doing to make things soft. And obviously the values wouldn't be more, they'd be more like that or something like that. But everything's too harsh in this painting and it's too hard. So this artist really didn't do what they're doing. And the other problem is here, like what the hell is going on with the neck? So the neck obviously would go down, sternocleidomastoid, go down here, and it would go down here because the ear would be right here, so it would go down. So I'm not sure what all this extra material is. And also it doesn't feel anatomically correct because the trapezius would go down more like that. And all this extra fabric makes it feel like he has a really thick, like, vase neck or something. So I think the anatomy's wrong. The shape of the shirt feels a little long. It makes his neck feel awkwardly, strangely long. Not to mention all the anatomical problems here. Like the muzzle of the mouth feels like it's too flat, like it's not really round. And I know there's the artist called Cynic's Design, and he talks about the muzzle of the mouth as like the front of a train, and it really has this kind of excess roundness. And you can also think of it as like a donut or something like that, where you can feel it wrapping around, and it has all this 3D form. But unfortunately, here it looks like the mouth is just a sticker. So if you actually went around the contour of the face, first of all, this men do have slanted foreheads back a little bit more, but this is a bit too extreme, so it makes them look a little bit like a Neanderthal or something. So this would be slanted less like that, and then this would go, that'd be the midline of the face. So the middle of the nose needs to shift over a little bit, and then the mouth kind of needs to shift over a little bit too, but it'd be more, you need to feel more of that roundness. So the whole shape feels a little bit off. So everything, the anatomy is kind of really bad on this. This is a horrible painting. I mean, I'm really not a fan of this. I'm not really sure why this is the official portrait of him, but this is awful. I've seen much better portraits of him because obviously in the presidential portraits, it's not like one particular one is the only one that they ever did and the only one they ever hang up, but this is considered the presidential portrait. So it's awful. I mean, I hate this one. Horrible. This is probably F tier, honestly. This is horrible. All right, so after the Trail of Tears is Martin Van. We're going to look at this guy. Okay, so you can see the edge thing I was talking about here. It actually feels really soft. So this artist did all of his edges in the hair really quite nicely. Edges, see how they're all soft and they fade into the background. Now that's more of a, because all the fundamentals are intertwined, that's like an edge thing, but it's also a value thing, because if there's a value transition, there's an edge transition. So the edges are good here. The anatomy looks pretty correct. The composition is decently good. You could maybe get rid of that white right here and just leave the hand as a brighter portion so you have, attraction to the hand. But it's not an overly distracting thing. I do think the background is a bit boring in the sense that it doesn't evoke any sort of visual interest. So if you're looking at this, there's just like a random red seat that doesn't have a whole lot of definition. And then also this shadow, I think it's a shadow. I think it's a shadow. It could be a little bit softer of an edge, kind of like here, where you see that when somebody casts a shadow, it's sharper at the source and it's softer right here, but it wouldn't be particularly that sharp because the shadow would start actually at the back of his leg, if you can imagine behind him here. So this shadow is overly sharp. It shouldn't be that sharp at the source. So it gives off, that feels wrong. It feels like part of his clothing, almost like his leg splits in half and goes up there. So that's a bit strange. But overall, good anatomy, good, pretty good portrait. Like decent edges, just not that interesting of a background. So we're gonna put it in C tier. So this guy, there's definitely something anatomically wrong with this. And usually when you're looking at portraits, there can actually be a lot of asymmetry in the face, especially just everyday people. If you hold your tongue to the wrong side of your mouth, or if you just naturally go like this or something, then your natural kind of mannerisms throughout the day actually changes, you know, the way that your face looks, obviously. So everybody's a little bit asymmetrical because nobody's doing, you know, facial muscular balance all the day. It's just too much to think about. So sometimes you don't know if the anatomy problem is particularly with the, you know, the painting, or if it's actually just the face and they're just being true to the face. But here the eyes are a bit too big. Unless, I mean, some people do have larger eyes. Usually women don't have larger eyes, they just have smaller heads. But there's something that feels off about this. It's called the keystone shape. So if I go into the same position as him, you can see how wide my keystone shape is. Now that has to do with how long your eyebrows go in, but it also has to do with just your particular like anatomy and stuff. But this keystone shape feels a bit small, and I think it would be a little bit more large here. And then that eye, so if it goes down here, the nose would protrude right here. I think the eye is just a bit too far in on this side. I think that's what's really causing it. So the keystone shape would go out a little bit, and then you'd actually have to shift that eye over to the left, and then that would make it look a little bit less anatomically strange. Because the anatomy feels a bit off, I'm gonna have to place it in E tier, because it's not horrible, but the background's boring, and quite frankly, there's something that feels strange. Let's see this. This is a decent portrait, I can already kind of see. Now, I would say that the texture is overly distracting in the background. So if you see this right here, you can see the background is made with a lot of tiny little brush marks, and that's because they're using too small of a brush, in my opinion. Now, a lot of the stuff is opinion-based, but a lot of it is also objective, because when you're looking at this, the texture feels a bit off, because the sky is never going to be textural this is more of like a fur texture or something like that. But if you just went in here and you actually painted it with a softer edges, you can see that I'm just like blending a little bit. Now you wouldn't actually blend the paint after you painted it like this. And you still want a little bit of texture, it's just you don't want it to be overly kind of textural, or else it feels a bit strange. You can see this is already starting to kind of bring more focus to the face. Now you don't want to make it all blendy smooth and stuff, because that's going to look unnatural, because nothing is really that airbrushed. But if you just take away some of that detail, it already feels cleaner, crisper, a little bit easier to look at, and there's less distracting details around. So to avoid that in your own paintings, avoid dry brushing too much, make sure you have the same value in certain areas, and then just make sure your edges are consistent, and that you do large passages with large brushes, and you won't necessarily have this problem. Their ears start to grow, and they continue to grow, obviously, as for all of us as we age. But if you look at the thirds of the face here, that's where the ears should be. So if this face is not in perspective, which it doesn't seem to be tilting backwards or forwards, the ear is placed way too far to the back and down. Now, it can be sometimes a likeness, like some people have weird ears, but seems to be an over exaggerated. Yeah, it looks a bit strange. Yeah, that looks way more correct. So it seems to be slanting back a little bit, and the ear does look like that when you can see that my ear goes down when I tilt my head back, right? And that's naturally what happens. So maybe this is another instance where the head was back and they painted it that way, and then he moved his head forward, and then he painted the second part of the face. So that's why you always got to check yourself, and you got to remember all these anatomical things, where everything lines up properly, and then it can help you prevent these issues, especially when you're working from light. Overall, not a bad painting, but there are some issues with it that make it look a bit strange. D tier. Oh, looking at this, same sort of issue from earlier, but less extreme, because this reminds me a lot of a Sargent painting in the background of the guy with the bathrobe, who's a womanizer. But so there's kind of a little too much texture here. It's not as big of a problem as the other one, because obviously fabric is going to have that inherent texture. so it looks more natural, whereas the sky doesn't have any texture. It's actually super soft. A little bit too much texture kind of distracts a tiny bit, but it's not overly problematic. Going here, let's see, the eyes line up well. The eyes line up in this direction. Doesn't feel like anything's gonna tumble wrong there. The muzzle of the mouth is well defined, especially this rhythm line. W rhythm, very common, so we did that well. The mouth feels like there's teeth behind it, which is very important. Again, it's hard to tell specifically if the head is tilted back or forward, but in this instance, let's say, so this is how you check if your ear is correctly placed. You could draw a box around the head, and then you can draw a line from the nose, and it goes back a distance like this. So the ear is actually pretty close to being correctly placed. It needs to just move up just so slightly, just a little bit. So it's not really a huge deal. You know, if you're walking in the portrait gallery and you see this, you're not going to be super disheveled and be, you know, what's wrong with that? It's not really exposing itself too much, but it is a little bit low, so it seems a bit strange. I kind of like the context here, these letters and stuff. I don't know why this is such a consistent theme with letters. Maybe it makes them look like they're more busy than they are. The